Hi, I'm Reverend Matt, and welcome to Matt and Ralph Talk. And I'm joined by my colleague.
Hello, I'm Reverend Ralph, and it's such a pleasure to be back again your way today and waiting to explore what a beautiful episode we have ahead of us today.
Yeah, so we're looking at Lent and we're looking at different stories and themes of Lent. And today we're joined by a very special guest. We're joined by Bishop John of Swansea and Brecon Diocese. John, who are you, and what do you do apart from being a bishop?
Hi. Yeah, well, you've got it all in one, really. It's all consuming, I think, being a bishop at the moment. But yeah, Bishop of Swansea and Brecon. Previous to that, I was north. So this is the furthest south I've ever been with the church in Wales. And I was archdeacon in the north, and then asked to take this post up about 4 years ago. So I've just been working with the people down here in the diocese, seeing where the opportunities lie to build church, to build community, etc. And so it is all consuming at the moment.
Cool. Yeah, it's a big job, I hear, being a bishop. Definitely.
Don't do it, Matt.
Nobody's going to give that me. Don't worry. So specifically today, obviously being unordained minister is an element of service and sacrifice, but you do have a bit of a military background, and that's what we're sort of looking at today is in terms of service and sacrifice and those things. So could you share with us a bit about what led you to get into that and where that comes from?
Yeah, well, really, it was my upbringing and the place in which we lived. There wasn't much in the way of opportunity for work. I remember what really changed my mind was going to on a careers visit to Walls Meat Factory, and there was a long table. It must have been about 150 yards long, and a sort of full pig started at one end, and it went down to a bandsaw at the other end, where the last bit of the pig head was cut in half and the bit scooped out and put in a bucket. And I
Lovely.
thought to myself, well, if that's what they want me to do for the rest of my life, I'm off. Fairly soon after that, as soon as I could leave school, I left. So after that, I began to explore ways of escaping. I don't know whether it runs in the family though. My dad worked on railway building townships on the railway across Australia. Oh, my uncle Stuart was in the Navy. My sister escaped to Australia as soon as she was 18. I think it just runs in the genes in the family that as soon as we're old enough, we're gone.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So you started off in the Navy, and then you kind of I don't know, progressed. You became a chaplain then.
Well,
How
no,
did that go?
I didn't. That was it's in two parts really. I joined the Navy. I joined the Navy as a young lad, and I joined as an aircraft engineer. So a fleet air arm. It is what it is. So after initial training, etc., my first trip was 1978. Was on the old Ark Royal, and that was a 9-month trip. And then after that, I decided I liked the Navy. I'd stay in the Navy. So I sort of carried on working in the fleet air arm. I did that for 12 years. So I didn't come out of the Navy until I was 30. What I couldn't do when I come out was settle, because you're always moving, you're always going somewhere. And even though we were married, it was our wedding anniversary a couple of days ago, 46th wedding anniversary. Even though we were married,
Congratulations.
I found to settle in a normal job. And I ended up in the Middle East in working on a contract in Saudi Arabia. And funnily enough, that's where I found most of my ex-mates that had left the Navy as well. They all just seemed to drift over that. Or Oman as well. That was another place where a lot of people went to work. And I did that for a couple of years. It was after that that I went into the church. It was while I was sat picking my nose in the desert, really, that I decided, is this what I want to do for my life? I decided I didn't. And it was quite a revelation to me that this idea of going into the church and giving something back.
Yeah.
And I didn't think the church would want me. So I was expecting them to say no. I was thinking maybe Mission Aviation Fellowship might want me because of my aircraft experience. But as it happened, as I went through the process, as you both know, of going into the church, the discernment process, just went from one step to another step to another step before I found myself in St. Michael's. As it was there, it's St. Paddens now down in Llandaff. So really, I went into the church around 34, I think I was, can't remember. And then it was after 6 years in Rill, working in Rill as a curate and then a priest vicar, that I decided to give something back. It was in between parishes. It was at that stage where I needed to move on somewhere. I didn't know where I wanted to move on to. there wasn't many places where I felt inspired by or felt led to go to. And then I had a phone call off somebody saying, you fancy coming back into the Navy for a while. So it's in two complete separate parts, really. I went back in as a chaplain for a couple of years. That's how it happened.
All right, right. Brilliant, brilliant. Talking about giving back and then centering on the theme that we're looking at this episode, which literally is service. Now, when
Yeah.
you hear the word service, what does it really mean to you personally?
I think real service is sacrifice as well. And I think real service is a giving of the best of yourself to, in my case, I mean, some people might not be religious listening to this, but in my case, a giving the best of myself to God so that God can make the best of myself for the world. So I think service is not something that is a 9 to 5 job, or I do things for the community during the day, then at night, that's my own time. I think service is a complete giving of oneself, a purpose to the world, really. That's what I feel service is.
That's good. That's quite good. Now, we know you've got a military, background. You've got a military experience, and then definitely there's going to be some form of service. There's a way service may or is being approached military wise. What would you say is, the comparison or the difference if you're just going to put side by side on both sides, military service and any other form of public service? What would you say? How would you rate them side by side? How would you compare them? Or probably just tell us what differences you could find in there, in both.
I think service in the military is in a sense, it's all consuming. You don't think about service when you go. I thought about escape when I was going. I was just a kid wanting to run away, really. So you don't think of it in terms of service. But the minute you walk through those gates, I can still remember them shooting behind me in Raleigh, 1976. The minute you walk through those gates, you begin to realise that service is something that is much bigger than just about yourself. And so what they try and create when you first go into the Navy is a team. You begin to realize that service is what people give to you and what you give to others, that you have a focus and an aim, and the focus and the aim is something that must be done together. You can't do it in isolation. Now, I would say when I think of civil service, say, or somebody's in the civil service, I immediately think of a job. That's the job, what they do, and then they go home. With the Navy, you've got to remember, you don't go home, especially if you're not married. It's all consuming. It's the whole of the day, whole of the night. It's living with people that you might like and might not like, but it's about focusing together on a particular plan and a particular aim and making the very best you can together. So that living together is something that is different, that you find in the military, you don't find anywhere else. You begin to form brothers and sisters in the military that you wouldn't normally form in society. It's not just like going down the pub for a drink with your mates. After you've had your drink with your mates, you're all going to get back to the mess deck and you're all living together and you're all trying to work together and trying to rub along together. So it's an all-consuming thing, I think, in the military, as opposed to having space to step back and being able to step out of service, as I would think.
Right. So talk us through your experience when we talk about leadership and service. I'm quite sure there's been some humble experience for you in this regard. So if you would please talk us through your experience in terms of what you may have experienced alongside serving with servicemen and women. What does it look to you like?
I think for a lot of people, if they don't know the military, they imagine it's about people standing around barking orders. I tell you what to do and you do it. It's very much not like that at all. The molding of people into teams, there's a lot of that in the beginning when you're in the services. But after that, you're assumed that you grow up and you live to the same values as everybody else. So leadership in the military, I would say, is building confidence into your team, that they can trust you, listening to other leaders around you, working as a team together, and making sure that when you make decisions as a leader, everybody understands what those decisions are and the reasons why we've made them. I think being a leader in the military, you've also got to be open to other people's opinions. And I've found some leaders that are very poor at that. Some inside the military, but a lot outside the military as well. Are very poor at listening to other people's opinions. If I had to lead a group, say I was a petty officer when I was first in there, so that's a bit like a sergeant if you were in the army. Other people have got better ideas than you sometimes. And showing true leadership means that you listen to them, and sometimes you implement things that you wouldn't have implemented yourself either. So it's as much listening as it is ordering people around. I always remember a chief when I went on a leadership course. An old chief petty officer said to us, if you ever have to put anybody on a charge that works for you, if you've got to put anybody on a charge, you remember it's as much your fault as it is theirs. And I've always remembered that leadership is about inclusion, bringing everybody into the story, focusing on what the goal is, and bringing everybody into that story so they're as focused on the goal, and we get from A to B as quickly as we possibly can.
Thank you. So we looked at the area of service a little bit, and kind of giving you a bit unfair, but seeing as you're a bishop, I thought, throw you a curveball. Let's go service and also looking at sacrifice, because I think that's important because it comes with it. Sacrifice is something that we often talk about, especially in the Christian faith and things like that. But what does we can think about sacrifice in Remembrance Sunday and things like that, and giving of lives. But what does that look like in the military context? Because that is a part of it, but it's not all of it.
No, not at all. You sacrifice a lot, and so does your family. You cannot sacrifice in a vacuum. When I sacrificed, my family suffered as well as I did. If you're in the Navy, it's not unusual to go away for 9 months or for 6 months. So I've said goodbye to my wife and 2 children just before Easter and come back at Christmas. And in many ways, that's a huge sacrifice. When I was a chaplain, I saw the other side of that sacrifice. I saw people who were desperately homesick, who were finding it hard to hold on to their jobs because just the thought of being separated from family or whatever, it was very, very difficult. And then I see the families at home as well, people that might be struggling financially, they might be struggling, or they might be struggling with children that have got particular problems, or just struggling trying to live in a home without a father. Sacrifice in the military was never about just yourself. It was about all of us. When we all went away, we had to look after each other. We had to try and keep in touch. Remember when I first went away, there was no phones. You didn't phone home. There was nothing on the ship where you could make a phone. You had to write a letter. And I always laugh and tell people, if you ever have to get to the place where you've got no phone, never argue by letter. Because you have to get it better. And I'd get it about a month and a half later, and there's a big drip about something or other. And then I'd get upset, and I'd write a big drippy letter back. And then she'd get it a month or so after that, and she'd be thinking, what's this about? So you never argue by letter. But I think sacrifice as well, we have to be kind to each other. There are times when there might be tragedies at home that a sailor could not get back home for. But there are other times when it's possible to get people back home. So the Navy was really very, very good. When it came to sacrifice, they understood how painful it was for people to be separated from each other and how difficult it was to try and grow family. Yeah, I mean, we're still together after 46 years, but I think that first 10 years that we were married, I probably spent the best part of 7 away.
Right. That's big. That is big.
That's really, that's really huge. It is indeed.
Yeah.
I never saw Becky walk, my first daughter, and I heard her talk on a tape, a little cassette tape.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That is, yeah. Thank you. That kind of puts it into perspective, I think, quite clearly for us. So you've obviously talked around sort of like what people go through and things like that, and that's really helpful for gaining that perspective, because I don't think it's something. I think you can have that sort of realization that is things, and if you've got friends in the military and other things like that, and have that, that kind of insight a little bit, but not in the same way and so clearly told. Is there anything in terms of your ministry, or think about being a chaplain as well, or just your time served, where that cost of service has become particularly clear at all? Is there a standout time for you?
I think one of the hardest times, I think, was the way the military works is usually with the Navy, you'd be away for maybe 18 months or 2 years. So you'd be on frontline service. So wherever the ship went, you were for 2 years, and you'd be ashore for 2 years. When it came to the Falklands War, that kicked everything out of sync. And so I spent the best part of 3 years away then. I found it very hard. I'd never been homesick before. And I think this brought me to a kind of faith as well. I often tell people about this. After the Falklands, we came back home. And then in 83, I jumped on a ship and we sailed for 9 months. So I've been away for most of the previous year. Then we jumped on a ship and I sailed for 9 months. And we're sailing to the Far East. Now, when you're a young lad, that's all your dreams come true. You know, we're off and away we go, and it's not too bad. But I got small children, a small child at that time. I hadn't seen her, as I said, I hadn't seen her take her first steps. And I'd heard her talk on a cassette. I got home, we spent about 3 months at home. And I remember for the first time in my life, I was homesick. So this lad that had always been running away to escape, I was suddenly homesick. And it was in the Red Sea. I wasn't in the Red Sea. I was on a boat in the Red Sea. And I remember, this is when I came back to faith, really. I remember lying on my bunk and remembering the times as a kid that I'd been to church. I was an Anglican, cradle Anglican in many ways. The times I'd been to church and how I couldn't wait to escape from that and then join the Navy and think I never have to go again. But there I was in the Red Sea thinking about these times. And I went down to the chapel. On the bigger ships, I was on the Invincible. On the bigger ships, there's a chapel. And I nicked a Bible out of the chapel. And I took it back to my bunk space. And that's the only space you've got on a ship. Your little space is a bit bigger than a coffin. It's about 6 foot long, 18 inches deep, and 2.5 foot wide. That's your space. Crawled into my bunk space and I began to think about the times I've been to church. And I remember the Even song and the Nunc Dimittis. And how we'd sort of chanted that every week. And for all the words that came back, that was the words that came back. Lord, now let us thou thy servant depart in peace. And I just thought, I have no peace. And I knew it was the story of an old man and Jesus was a baby. So I started looking at the beginning of the Gospels and, you know, you only got to get to Luke and there it is. And I remember reading that and something inside me changed. Everything changed. And I found a connection with God I hadn't had before. And I decided at that point that I could either carry on doing what I'm doing now and be lonely all my life, or I could be part of this great story I think that God draws us into. This story that really brings life, and probably the life I've always been looking for. So that was a huge moment for me. And it was at the beginning of the trip, not at the end. So I still, God being God, still had to do another 8 months before I got home. But it changed for Jan as well. It was a watershed moment for Jan at home. When I got back, she connected with a church, and suddenly, you know, our lives changed really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow. That must be some faith under pressure. You know, this is having your faith in the face of uncertainty. And so I'm quite curious. Talk us through how faith operates in the face of uncertainty and of pressure. What would you say anchored your faith, or what was your faith anchored on in such moments?
I think my faith has always been anchored on the absolute certainty that even if I dither, if I waver, if I have uncertainties, a bit like Job, you know, if I get into that position where I can't feel God, somehow there is something inside of me that says God still knows I'm here. There's that bit in Job, chapter 14, the end of chapter 14, where Job feels is at his lowest ebb, is at his darkest point. He has a big whinge about the fact that even a willow tree gets a chance to grow again, but here is him dying. But right at the end of that chapter, it says, I know somehow, even in all of this, I know that you will long for the creature that your hands has made. And for me, it's having faith in that verse and in the God who promises the promise of that verse, that he, even though I might not be able to feel him, he always longs for the creature that he's made. So just to have a God out there who longs for you and longs for the best for you, even though the best might not be happening around you, always anchors me.
Right. That's listening to your faith story and military, experience. I'm quite curious also. I want to know, how is God seen in the military setting? So in a military environment, what's the question about God? How is God deemed or perceived in that setting?
Well, if you're on board, when I went back as a chaplain, I went back on destroyers, so a lot smaller ships. So the first place I went to was It was it was Sierra Leone. It's a civil war in Sierra Leone, and I was on HMS Liverpool. And what I found when I went on a small ship, as a chaplain, you're just going to make church wherever you can make it. So there's no chapel on a small ship. It's, there's no room. So you just find a space, get the tannoy, tell everybody you're going to have a church service. I can't tell you what individuals, their deepest feelings about God, but I can tell you that when we had services on board, double the percentage of people that go to church normally in society were at those services on our ship. And it wasn't about me. That was about the norm. That's what people would turn up to. You quite often see soldiers and sailors and airmen turning up at things like Remember It's Sunday. Everybody does that. That's what they turn up to. But if you talk to them about faith, you will find that most of them, I would say, but the majority of them had a belief in God.
Yeah.
How that belief worked its way out in their lives is obviously more complicated and more difficult. But the starting point was always a good starting point in the military. I would say more people believed in God than didn't believe in God. More people were receptive to conversations. You could have a conversation with somebody, ask them where they were from, ask them how they was, and ask them, well, how do you feel about God? People knew you as the bish. So you're always called the bish on board. But they knew you as an ear. They could come and talk to you on their own. They could come and talk to you quietly about all their problems, whatever that might be. And they were easier to pray with, I find, than a lot of the situations I find myself in now. So there was more reception, I think, in the Navy to the idea of God. Religion was more formulated. So when people had a service, they wanted a service. They wanted to have a beginning and a middle and an end. So you couldn't just sit around and chat and let's maybe have some prayers now, or shall we sing, something or whatever. They wanted something that was more formulated. And when when we had a Eucharist on board, I could see how important that was to people, especially when they're separated from loved ones. It was almost like a connection point between them and God and those who they love. So it was a privilege to serve in the Navy. And it was a privilege to be with men and women that took faith seriously, even though they were mad as badgers when they got ashore. A lot of them, you could always talk on a deep level to them. And that was a joy.
Thank you. Yeah. So just to kind of move a bit more into sort of Lent and thinking about that in terms of Lent being a season where obviously you said that this series is about Lent themes roughly, and service and self-giving and sacrifice is a big part of that when we've seen Jesus. So what in your experience does healthy sacrifice look like, or unhealthy sacrifice? Because I think there can be this thing where people feel sometimes that they I suppose that they give out too much because it's all they know. Does that don't know if that makes sense, or
Yeah, no, it does. Sometimes you lose track, don't you? What direction you're meant to be going in, or why you're doing what you're doing. You find out with everybody. You find it especially in clerical circles where we do so many funerals, and we find ourselves in so many situations where people are in dire need or dire straits. That somehow over the years, we can lose our way. I think healthy sacrifice is a sacrifice, is a question in sacrifice. So I question, I don't mean this in a funny way, I suppose it sounds funny, but why am I a bishop? I ask myself that all the time. Is this where you want me? Is this what you want me? And I think sometimes in the past I've lost myself in working so hard in a parish that in the end it's become all about me. It's become about my decisions. I've sort of edged God out of the picture. And when I've edged God out of the picture, the sacrifice destroys you, because you're never being refilled. There's nothing, the joy begins to disappear. Everything that you have, you begin to give out and give out and give out until you have no more. So I think healthy sacrifice is the sacrificial, it's almost like a spiritual well. Good sacrifice means that the well will always be full and there will always be more to give because the well is always full. When we begin to run dry, when we begin to lose our touch with God, And when we begin to lose our purpose, that's bad sacrifice. We're starving ourselves. So I would say, as much as you're infilled is as much as you can give out if you want to be healthy in sacrificial giving.
So just to think on, because obviously I've got a great privilege of working alongside a lot of veterans and other people, and having experience with people who are active service members as well. And one of the things which I've kind of picked up as a theme is that sometimes people get a little bit lost when they leave.
Yeah.
So if, just in case anyone listening or anything like that, what do you have anything in terms of that after you leave and that sacrifice, and you kind of done that bit? What's a good way of picking yourself up or reorientating you? Do you have any advice?
Well,
Big question. Sorry.
The hardest thing for me to give back, even though it was time to leave the Navy and I knew it was time to go, and most people know it's time to go. Sometimes you have to go because of injury or whatever. But one of the hardest things for me was giving my ID card back. So I've been given an ID card, 58058P Lomas. That was my ID card. Having to give that back denied me access to everything that I knew in the military. I could no longer go through those base gates and just give them an ID card. I could no longer find access to the place where most of my friends were, where the life I understood and I knew well was, and suddenly you're on the outside. And that's a really hard thing to suddenly go on the outside. And I would say, as soon as possible, there's some great organizations, SAFA and even the Legion or wherever. But what you need to realize, and what I needed to realize when I left the Navy, was that there are as many people outside of the Navy and more that understand what I was going through as there was inside. So that longing for inside of my ID card back, my number back, that gave me an identity, really, really, it was a false hope. I had to just put that to one side. But I needed to connect. And one of the hardest things, I think, for a lot of men and women is to reconnect. I could connect with Jan, I connected with my family. But so much of my life had been about working alongside people and sacrificing with people in a way that I never was in civilian life. So I would say, find those connections. You can find them in church. Lots of veterans in church turn up to church. But I think once I found those connections, and once I realized that my life wasn't over when I gave my ID card back, then I could begin to focus on new things. But it was really hard. And I said to you right at the beginning of this, I came back, I couldn't adjust, I ended up going away again and trying to find an inside that I felt comfortable with again. And that was a massive mistake. Coming back into the UK and coming into the church, I found another family. You need to connect. Living alone doesn't do you any good. All the best parts about being in the services were about being together, working together, doing things together, living together. You need to find that again when you leave.
Thank you very much. It's been quite a journey. I can tell it's been quite a journey of your life, and having to have on this in this episode of someone who doubles up both as an ex-military and also a bishop, right? This kind of gives me the impression that both of these profession has got an element of service, or massively got elements of service and sacrifice in them, and it takes courage to be able to step into either of this profession. You want to be a military person, it takes a whole lot of courage to be able to live through that experience, and then you may actually not return in one piece. You want to be a clergyman. It also takes a lot of courage throwing yourself into the community and into people and serving them, being with them when they are in their highs and in their low moments. Now, so I'm quite curious. I want to know a little bit more what the military life, how has it changed and shaped you on how you understand this word courage in terms of sacrifice?
Yeah. I think there's two elements to courage, isn't there? There's a courage you see, there's a physical courage. You look at something, you might see a video clip of something where you're astounded by what this person physically was able to do, the courage that they had to do what they did. And then there's a moral courage as well. And the moral courage is where you're able to stand up for what you believe to be true and to be right. And both of them are equally important. And you see see both of them. In the military, people look to the military and expect physical courage, somebody doing something that is extraordinary and beyond. That's why you've got things like Victoria Cross or whatever. Extraordinary acts of bravery. But there's a moral courage as well, where really you have standards to live your life by. There comes crunch points in your life where suddenly you have to make a decision to either do something or not do something, to either say something or not say something, knowing that it will be uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable for yourself, or maybe even for the people that hear it. I would say the military for me has given me the courage, the moral courage to be the person I am today. I don't know about bravery. We just did what we did when we had to do it. And so you need to talk to somebody else about that physical act of bravery that goes above and beyond what people expect it to be. But my moral compass and my moral courage was formed in the Navy. Most of the decisions I make based on what I learned living with people in community, in cramped spaces where life was difficult. Most of the lessons I've learned and most of the decisions I make are based on that. They're not based on anything else. And I think the Navy formed me into who I am today. I hate giving people bad news. I hate telling people, don't do that, or we shouldn't do this, or I'm afraid we're going to have a conversation about whatever it might be. But if you haven't got moral courage, I don't know how you can be a cleric or be somebody who is a spiritual leader or a spiritual guide to others. It's a tough one to talk about, and you can't really talk about individual things that have happened, but there are just moments in my life when I've had to stand out in a crowd and say, I'm not doing that. And I suspect you've found that as well, Ralph, and you've probably found it as well, Matt. That moral courage is just as important as that physical courage that you see. And both of them are brave things to do, I think.
Right. Now, just as we come into the end of this, it will be quite helpful for us to hear how you view hope, right? Because we've talked about sacrifice and then we've talked about courage and how it relates to sacrifice. But here is you sitting just right in front of us and listening to the wealth of the experience you've been through and now the experiences you're having being a bishop and yes, having to have the blessing of these two experiences in one life. I think it's something quite huge. But I want you to just speak to us briefly. What would you say about hope? How has your experience as a military chaplain and even more now your experience as a bishop, what has it taught you about life, about hope, about faith, about God? What has it taught you mainly about hope?
For me, I know that the battle is already won. So that battle, the reason why Christ did what he did, why Christ is who Christ is so that the battle might be won. Christ sacrificed, Christ died, Christ rose again, not just out of the goodness of his heart, but out of that deep sense of love for us. And I know that the battle's won. So I always have that hope in mind. I know, no matter what, that my Redeemer lives. And at last he will stand upon the earth, and I see from my eyes shall behold and not another. I know that to be true. My worry about that hope is how I get there and everything that happens in between. So I would say I always have hope because I know the battle's won. My biggest worry, and the worry that you don't want to put onto other people, is how the battle is won for me and how the battle is won for you and how the battle is won for all of us. I don't think I've ever lived without hope. Even in my darkest moments, I've known that there's a light there somewhere. And even if I can't feel or I can't see that light, I know it's there because God has spoken in my life so many times that I could not, in all faith, say that I didn't know that God wasn't there. I know God is. The way that God has acted, the way that God's drawn me and my family, and the stories I see that other people have lived out in their lives always gives me hope. So hope's not just about me. It's the fact that the battle is won for all of us, for everybody. And so it's not a lonely hope. It's not a hope that, oh, well, you know, somewhere over the rainbow, maybe we'll all be okay. This is a hope based on the fact that Christ has died for all of us, and Christ has risen, and with him we rise also. And so that's my main drive. I can't go back from that. Even if I rejected God, and even if I threw away the church, and even if I said I'm having nothing to do with church, religion, society, community, or anything ever again, I would never be able to say that God wasn't there. So that's where my hope comes from, the knowledge that God is there. My worry is how we live together as a society, how we live in community, and how we get to that place where the battle's won, where we enjoy that life that God has promised us. That's always been my worry. I'm not so good at the other bit. I'm fine on.
Thank you. So just to come into land then.
Yeah.
Just to come into land. If anyone's listening to this and thinking about service and in their own life, whether it's in the military, maybe, or otherwise, or looking at this and thinking maybe I want to get ordained. Don't know why you do that, but yeah, of course, great calling.
Why did you do that, man?
God, everything is down to God. I blame God thoroughly for that.
Okay.
God wanted me anyway. So if you're thinking about that type of service, and I suppose any major commitment, but especially on that military side, what would you encourage people to consider if they're thinking about that? What's the thing that people need to take on board?
What do you want to live your life for, I would ask? What's the point of your life? Would you want a point to that life? Are you happy just bumbling along, and whatever bump you bump into next is what, you know, the next thing you do? Or would you want something? What do you want from life? I think there's deep in everybody's heart, in everybody's psyche, if we're created in the image of God, somewhere within us, there is desire to work out what that means and what it looks like. And I would say that would be the starting point for me, would be, what is the purpose? You know, the big question, why am I here? Why do I do the things I do? Why do people talk about a God that maybe I can't feel or I can't see? I've been told in the past it's just a crutch for weak people. Is it a way of, you know, helping yourself limp through life? Or is there something really there? You know, why do I do what I do? Would I want to live my life any differently if I knew God was real? Would it change my life at all? If it wouldn't change your life, there's no point in it, is there? But I think the question would be, for me, just those big questions. Who am I? Why am I? Is God there? What am I meant to do with this life that he's given me? It's a good place to start. And I think that was a wake up moment for me. See, was this ain't working? I'm bumbling from one thing to another. I'm deeply unhappy. I've never been homesick before. Why am I feeling like I'm feeling? What came back to me was a feeling somewhere in the past where God had been knocking into my head the fact that he was there, even when I wasn't listening. It was just that quiet knock, knock, knock. And for us as humanity, if we are created in the image of God, if God is who God says he is, that's got to demand a response from me. It's got to demand a response. And that's the journey. That's when the journey begins. That's when life gets exciting. It might sound really boring to people, you know, you're a cleric or even you're a bishop, just crusty old bishop. But I have never been more fulfilled as when I gave my life to something that I felt might be worth giving it to. Never been more fulfilled. And I'm as fulfilled now as that day when I actually said, right, I'm just going to do what I think you want me to do. Tell me what you want me to do. I've never been more fulfilled. Every day is it's an exciting journey every day, even the bad days are good days.
Right. That's quite, and it's important for us to quickly highlight here before we tie all this up that there is it kind of makes me understand that there is some form of difference between fulfillment and being fulfilled and being successful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
You know, quite a number of people may be aiming at being successful, but eventually you may be successful and not be fulfilled. So it kind of tells me that there is this element of fulfillment when you give your life to something that is, to something or someone bigger than you.
Yeah.
You're so right, Ralph. I mean, yeah, being fulfilled. People look at you and think you're leading a successful life, and you're just quietly dying inside. You're doing all the stuff that everybody thinks is exciting. You might have a house, you might have family, you might have a great job, you might have great ideas, you might be a fantastic entrepreneur. But like you say, fulfillment and success don't necessarily walk the same path.
Thank you. That's wonderful. I think sometimes it's easy to ask the question of what am I going to live my life for when we're at the start of our lives. Like if I start asking what am I living life for now, I start upsetting a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's a scary thing to do then, isn't it? And so, and then you've got a lot to consider. So it is something which is, I think it's important to bring yourself back to that question. And it's really, especially when we think about that service and that sacrifice, like, what are you living life for? What are you giving up, or what are you taking up, which you shouldn't do?
Yeah.
Or maybe you should do. So, yeah. Thank you very much, Bishop John. It has been absolutely fantastic to have you. I'm deeply appreciative.
Indeed. Yeah.
So I'm Reverend Matt. I'm joined by my colleague.
And this is Reverend Ralph. And we can't be more grateful to you for gracing this episode with your wealth of experience and your knowledge. It's so beautiful to see the life of an ex-military and a bishop in one piece, and having to bless us with so much of his experiences and your knowledge. We're quite very grateful for you. Thank you very much, Bishop John. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to see you both. God bless.
God bless. And if you want to join in, then please do follow the links below where Matt and Ralph talk. And we've got all the episodes online, including our past Advent series as well. You may want to check out. So God bless you and take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.